So hi, welcome. We're here for a Taos conversation today on building communities in action with Celiane Camargo-Borges and Kristin Bodiford. Thank you so much, both of you, for hosting this conversation today. We will be recording it, so it will be available in the comments. Feel free to share it. This is open to everyone. Feel free to continue the conversation in the comments after today and to reach out to each other. And a few words about the Taos Institute. You probably know already about us, but we are a nonprofit educational organization. We're entirely virtual, and we promote social constructionist, relational, and appreciative ideas and practices across the world, across disciplines. And we do so through many different ways. So courses, workshops, lots of free resources on our website. And now, since last year, the Taos Institute Commons, our online community, where we hope that we're building this sense of community around the world with different languages and different people joining together. So I don't want to take too much time, but thank you for being here. And Celiane and Kristin, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are here today for a brief 1 hour. So we're just gonna engage a little bit, and we would like to share the flavor of an approach we are working with. But from the beginning, I want to invite you to reach out, to connect with us afterwards, to continue the conversation. So right now is gonna be just a glimpse of what we are doing. And just to start it off, we're gonna be talking a little bit more about ourselves, but just to do a quick check-in, let's do a round of our names and where we are talking from. My name is Celiane, and I'm talking right now from Amsterdam.
My name is Kristin, and I'm talking from Atlanta in the US. I am going to pass over to Benoit.
My name is Benoit Zuma, and I'm talking from Leiden, which is right in the middle between Amsterdam and Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Doug, do you want to go next?
Oh, I'm Doug Gilbert. I'm in Colorado currently.
Doug, pick someone else. You trying to find your screen? You want me to?
No, unmuted, so go ahead.
Okay. Josh. Oh, did you say Noah?
I said Noah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, my name is Noah.
I'm Nora Eleonora. I'm from Aruba. I'm in Aruba.
We have Nora and Noah. Thank you, Nora.
Yeah.
Oh, we had a confusion there.
And Noah.
Oh, hi. My name is Noah. I'm currently in Auckland, New Zealand.
Auckland, New Zealand. Thank you, Noah. And Marlies. Marlies.
Marlies. Yeah, hi. I'm calling in from London.
Fantastic. UK. And Josh?
You are on mute, Josh.
I'm Josh Plaskoff. I'm calling in from Carmel, Indiana in the United States.
Great. And I think Thomas?
You are on mute, Thomas. I don't know if you're trying to say something.
Well, Thomas unmutes. Alex, did you say where you're calling from?
I am calling from Montpelier, Vermont.
Nice.
Great. And when Thomas is able to connect, we'll have Thomas share where he's from. Back to Celiane. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're really excited.
Yeah, so, well, today we would like to share with you first a framework we are creating to build communities, and then the illustration of our last adventure together in Uganda, where we connected with another 14 participants, and together we created this learning journey to Uganda to visit some partners that we have been working for quite some years. And we're gonna say a bit more about that, but just to give some context, I know some of you also work with communities and creating communities and building communities, and we know the challenging of creating the feeling of being connected, the challenge to engage, to create a psychological trust and sense of belonging, especially if you are working with different cultures and countries. And working with the social constructionist approach has been helping us to actually deconstruct the idea of community as an entity and embracing community as something that will build in action. So if we put relationships at the center, communities are always being unfolding, emerging, and forming with us and with others. And so we have been practicing how to build community in action, and together with that, also playing a little bit with language, how framing and reframe language opens up new opportunities for us. One quick example, working with Uganda, we are trying to find new models of philanthropy, and we are just trying to change the name of helping people with caring about people. So we care about each other, and in this relationship we learn from each other and we grow and we develop together. And by changing the language, as you know, with constructionism, it's just not a matter of saying differently, but you open up and you create different realities and feelings and invitation. So with that, in this framework, we are working with what we are calling know-how and know-being. So the know-being is, it's more the principles that invite us as a professionals to adopt a stance and a position. It's a way of being. And the know-how are the tools or resources, if you will, that helps you to move from this way of being into action. How can I do this way of being? And I'm going to quickly talk about the principles, and then I will invite Kristin to say more about that. But these principles, we have wrote about this principle before in a publication on Appreciative Inquiry Journal, and we can share with you later. But these principles, we have 4 principles that we work with. And the first one is about centering collaborative and relational processes. So this principle of know-being is an invitation to center our attention on these collaborative and relational processes. So we want to shift our way, our attention to individuals and focus more on the power of the collective. So how can we focus on the intelligence of the group, so the power of this collective, and encouraging deep levels of connection. And with that, we can explore more values of what people do together and what their doings will be making. So this is the first principle. The second principle is engaging in dynamic and organic experience. So this is a principle that invites us to move away from this fixed state of mind and of way of behaving, and also looking for being present in the moment. What is happening right now and how can we respond to that? And so in this organic response, we can have many, much more emergence to come. And that also avoids prejudgments. And now I'm thinking of this professor and philosopher from, I think it's from Nigeria, Bayo Akomolafe. And he says that in order to find ourselves, you must first lose it. And we need to lose it generously. So this is an invitation of losing ourselves into also the position that also Harlene Anderson says, the not knowing or not too quick to know. So how can we show up present to what is being offered to us? And that brings us to the third principle, which is recognizing complexity and multiplicity. So by being present to the moment, we also connect it to our curiosity, trying to really genuinely be curious about what's happening right here, right now, and how can I phrase some questions and make connections to the environment and to the context of here and now. And the final one is focusing on what is useful that can generate new possibilities. So as we are building these communities in action, and these principles, I think, gives you this idea of a movement, an action. As we engage, we are moving, we are being organic, dynamic. And when we find what is useful, we tire those universal statements of how things should be, how communities should work, and we embrace more what is useful for this community. And when we embrace that, we can be more responsive to what these local realities are presenting to us. So this is, in a nutshell, very quickly, some principles that we try to embrace and to take these positionalities as a way of being with communities and creating these actions that will form the communities we are working with. And I would like to give the floor to you, Kristin, to say more about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Celiane. I'd like to actually just pause for a minute and welcome Giselle for joining. I wanted to see if there was anyone else that had a chance to join. Let me get out of this and see. So Giselle, would you be so kind and let us know where you're calling from today? We're just introduced our name and where we're calling from. Oh, I'm going to ask you to unmute there. If you're well, I'm going to text chat to you in here as well. Okay, wonderful. So it looks like, Thomas, you're joining again too, and maybe your audio wasn't working. Is your audio working now?
It might be. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Awesome. So I'm Thomas. I'm from Connecticut, and just real quickly, my introduction to social constructionism was to put it as a comedian once, put it back in the 1900s when I was an undergraduate college student. So I'm glad to join you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Thomas. And Giselle, just making sure, seeing if you're able to unmute. Okay, we'll check back in with Giselle in a minute. So thank you. I wanted to just pause and thank you, Celiane, for kind of reviewing those principles. And I think Doug and Nora, you probably find them very similar to very familiar from when we were working together as a team on designing research as well and learning in those areas. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to just pause for any thoughts or questions or things that might have come up for you as Celiane was sharing the principles. Anybody have anything? We can continue on, but I just wanted to make sure I had a pause.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question about where was the most resistance to the different the different way of being together.
Ooh, fantastic. Okay, I think when we get into talking about the actual experience in Uganda, we can talk about that because that's a great question. Any other thoughts, things that struck you, questions, reflections, tensions? Okay, we'll continue on, but please just drop something in chat if you want us to pause, or just come off mute and say that you'd like to contribute something. So I think one of the things that Celiane and I are very much aligned around, and why we love working together so much, is that we see this ability to approach our work from a social constructionist orientation in a way that recognizes our collective responsibility and is able to we're better able to support groups of people coming together to look at from that framework of like relational responsibility to collective responsibility to address the challenges that we face in many communities. So we find it as an ethic of care that we embody in many of the challenges that we're facing as a global community now with the great work I know that Alex, you're involved with in climate action and collective action around the importance of protecting our global species and world, as well as, you know, the unjust and inequitable systems and structures that we have in place in our world. And so that for us, this really stems from a deep care of wanting to make a difference. So this aspect of communities in action is really important to us about how do we come together in meaningful ways that can help us build communities together that can take action around the things that are most important to that particular community. So I just wanted to mark that as a point, as something really important to us. And I think along with that, Celiane, I know this wasn't in our original paper, but we just had an opportunity to write another chapter that we were focusing on the transformative, regenerative kind of opportunities of thinking in this way to building communities in action. And there is a concept of cognitive injustice. And I think these principles really help us address kind of that transformative potential of learning in new ways together and enacting this multiple forms of knowledge together in new ways. Celiane, do you mind just speaking to that a little bit? And others may have some ideas run in that area as well.
Yeah, no, of course not. So there are some authors working with this idea that we can never achieve global justice if we don't take care of cognitive justice. And that means we need to be open to different ways of knowing. And we need to approach other communities as different and having diversity rather than some indigenous knowledge. They say we should skip this word of inclusion, because when we talk about diversity inclusion, usually we are talking from a hierarchical position that I recognize you and then I include you in my world. You are welcome to live my world. And these indigenous, they say, we don't want to be included in your world. We want the right to exist with our own world and our own believing systems. So by having cognitive justice means when we meet the different, when we go in different cultures, to embrace diversity, not in hierarchical ways, but valuing different ways of knowing as one more element to build up in this complexity. So when we are talking about complex problems and systems thinking, is also about this interconnection of knowledge that in combination can also increase and expand our ability to understand the problems and the challenges we face nowadays.
Thank you, Celiane. And I know multiple folks on this call are also actively involved in the educational system and may have other things to add to that as well, of thinking about the way we engage learning communities as well from that perspective. So I think we're going to actually jump into a little exercise together. Are you guys up for this? We're gonna walk through one of our steps. So Celiane talked about the no being, which many folks here are very steeped in social constructionist principles and practices, and that's maybe very familiar. And for those that want to dig deeper into like thinking about how these are enacted in our work, let's continue the conversation. But I also want to point to a know-how. So one of the things that Celiane and I have been very engaged with is using design thinking, because we feel like design thinking is very aligned with our no being principles of really being curious, engaging in co-creation together. And so we use a lot of know-how principles. So we shared in a little writing when we were talking about this, some 4 steps that we went through and kind of preparing our collective group together when we were in Uganda. So let me give you a little context of who was in Uganda with us. And this will help Marlies answer one of your questions too, because we had this amazingly wonderfully global community that came together in Uganda to learn more about the work. So it was a learning journey that we were engaging in. So we had people from many different countries. We had people from many different disciplines. So we had people with a very strong business background that were like, oh, this touchy-feely stuff, I'm not comfortable with this. What is this? Let's get an action plan. Let's figure it out. Let's root cause analysis. And so it brought so much richness to our experience together to have this amazingly wonderfully different group together. And so there was 14 of us that went to Uganda. Celiane and I have a long relationship. Some of you have heard about our relationships in Uganda going back over a decade of collaborative work. So we have very strong relationships, and we have a very consistent way of working with how the community works and their philosophies of work as well. So we find it very easy to work with their way of working because it's very aligned with how and we've got a lot of experience with it. But it wasn't always really comfortable for all of our learning journey participants, because it may have been the first time in that context, in that country, and in an African country, in a country with different levels of resources. And I mean, even just how we manage time was, a source of kind of how do you allow an organic, dynamic, relational process with people that have different kind of concepts of what time means and how we manage time. I want to look at these chats too. So I'm going to pause here I'm just going to finish that thought, and I'm going to invite Josh to say what you're talking about. So the context is 14 people from around the world coming together in Uganda to engage in a learning journey, but also 3 different partners in Uganda that have different various levels of experience working with each other. So a school that works in a community, it's a nonprofit school developed, created by and led by a Ugandan that recognized the need in his community, an organization that works with older people and youth, and really following kind of like a collective empowerment model of engaging strengths of different generations to create change in their community. And then in a community that has been recently in the last decade expelled, I'm trying to think of the right word, an indigenous community tribe that lived within the forest of Uganda, coexisted for their whole existence with in the forest with the guerrillas. And so they were forcibly removed from there, and they're really trying to figure out how to continue to build on their cultural strengths, value their cultural strengths, but also live as a very marginalized community in their country. So these 3 organizations also came together, and we had multiple generations. We had youth, adults, and older people all also coming together. So we developed this workshop to start us off with. So instead of engaging immediately in the work, we wanted to spend a lot of time just setting the foundation for our collaborative work and this way of working together as well. It allowed us a chance to kind of slow down and pause and center those relationships before we moved into the work. And so it was really fantastic. So Josh, I want to just stop. Would you be okay sharing what you've been texting? And then I think Doug, you also said something.
Oh, I just to kind of confirm what you're saying about no being, I like to think I've been doing, community to me has been about identity for years and years and years, and really about who we are in social context and our being. And so I've kind of used the know who, because we always talk about know what and know why and know how. So I figured to keep the trend up, I use know who as the kind of what you're using as the no being, just to kind of keep the theme. But it's the same concept, which is basically how do we understand ourselves as beings, evolving beings within a social context.
I love that. That also reminds me, Alex, I was just looking at one of the threads from your irresistible conversations about climate action, and there was the internal principles or internal development for the Sustainable Development Goals, which I hadn't seen. Someone had shared that. And I thought, oh, wonderful. This is great, because really this kind of social change is going to come about when we have that reflexive space, isn't it? Like the know who for ourselves, but also knowing others in a deeper way that values our shared humanity and doesn't other people. So I love that know who. Thank you for that. Doug, you also had something.
Well, yeah, so I do a lot of work with change in the corporate and now somewhat in the community setting. And one of the techniques I've used is called Scan, Focus, Act. And it looks very similar to your first three. Well, the reflective piece is kind of the improvement process that we put in place. But one of the pieces of research I'm working on now is looking at how communities of excellence, which this is part of the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, so that's the framing of it, how they set goals, because this ties then into the SDGs, which I just heard you talk about. And the problem we come up with is they don't know what their purpose is, so they can't set a goal. So we can have SDGs, the next version, the next version, the next version, until we have cohesiveness around a community, we'll never get toward a goal. That's what I'm starting to learn in the research. And we've had to reformulate what we're researching now a couple of times, because we've learned our initial ideas were not essentially reflecting what they're doing. And so we're in the interviews and that we're kind of reformatting what we're doing to get to the thematic analysis.
Oh, fabulous. Doug, would you be willing to share some of that in the thread as we kind of continue this discussion, what you're learning?
Yeah.
Okay. And you mean like the community being clear and having some sense of cohesive purpose, like what's the why in our work around this, or can you unpack that a little bit?
Okay, so this has been one of the challenges. So the Baldrige framework's about 35, 40 years old, something like that. It was created as a national excellence program, kind of based on some Japanese improvement ideas, a couple of different models there. And it fits the corporate closed system model relatively well. If you kind of close things down and you work on it, everything works out fine. When you open it up to a community, then you have these very, very variable configurations of what is the community. And what we're finding is what we look for is an anchor. So what is the anchor of the community? And once we find the anchor, then we have to go back and revisit what we call mission, vision, and values, which is also unfortunate terminology because it's too corporate. So we need a new terminology in that space. And so it's really the purpose, the aims. They're still struggling with that. I'm not doing that. They're still struggling with how you get that. And then my point is, how do we get to goals? How do we get to really looking at SDGs? Looking at these communities, how do we deliver on these things? Otherwise, if we have no cohesiveness as a community, how can we ever put actions to drive us toward SDG accomplishment? We probably can't.
Yeah, it's so interesting as we're operating in worlds that have structures that are in place that maybe have a different language or a different way of working, or come from kind of that more modernist thinking as well. Like you've got a closed system, whereas really living systems, communities are living dynamic systems. And how do you take those structures? Doing a lot of work with health equity as well. And it's how do I work in a corporate environment and apply these principles and find ways of using language that people can rally around and understand from a different language perspective. So that's great. I'd love to continue conversations about that. And I think as we're thinking about the no being piece too of that relational perspective, is that there is this richness in a community of many different ways of thinking and knowing and being and values and priorities. And how do you create a space for that? We talk about that common ground where you do need some alignment, but where it needs to be that people see themselves and their values and what's important to them in that common ground. And that's a really tough space when we're used to coming to consensus or other forms of forming our mission, vision, values, goals that, where we all have to sign off on that. So how do we maintain that kind of these principles that we're talking about as you're forming enough of a sense of commonality, recognizing how everyone's been able to contribute to that in a way that can move things forward. So I love what you're doing. Is there anything else anyone would like to add or reflect on regarding what Doug has shared and what Josh has shared? Okay, so I think this lets us go into our next step, which is actually doing one of the design thinking steps that we're calling first step framing. And so within that, you'll see many of the principles engaged in this: so relational orientation, a relational collaborative orientation, being organic and dynamic of whatever occurs in this step, really recognizing and celebrating complexity and multiplicity, and different values and strengths. And let's see, what's the other one, Celiane? I'm forgetting the next one. You would think I know. Oh, and then what's ever useful and generative in this moment. So we're going to do framing, which is really about us sharing. I think since we're all part of the Taos community, sharing, spending a little time framing, bringing ourselves into this conversation about kind of our hopes around our what we are continuing to co-create as the Taos community. Since the Taos community is something that's always a community that's under construction, that we all participate in. So if we could each take a moment, this is where we get to know each other a little bit more deeply beyond the name and location. Share a little bit of one hope that you might have in terms of what we're building as a Taos community and how that relates to your values, like why that's important to you. And should we just do it when people are comfortable, or should we popcorn? How do we want to do this? Any suggestions? Okay, we're gonna popcorn it. So that means I get to call on someone, and I'm gonna call on Nora. And Nora, when you're done, if you could popcorn it over, just pick someone else. And if anyone wants to pass or needs more time, just go ahead and let us know.
And it does not matter how much you are involved with Taos, but what are your dreams and hopes to be involved, or you imagine this community would be fruitful for you to be part of?
Co-creation is for me. Okay, I'll start.
Go, Nora.
Co-creation is for me a very, very important way of building community. Mm. And here in Aruba, it's a so small island, and I'm working at UNESCO, so I'm really trying to cooperate with all the NGOs by those SDGs, with UNESCO stand for, of course. And it's not easy, but it's I go, you just said, to be open, to really be curious for other thinking of people, other nations. So we are here in Aruba. We have 159 nationalities here in Aruba. So it's very, very great if we are really open as an Arubian to co-create with those people new communities on the island. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Nora.
Marlies?
Yeah, so I guess my involvement is I'm busy working on my research proposal for a PhD. And some of the principles I'm applying are coming from your work, Celiane, as well, to try and bring that sort of design, and it's maybe an attitude of design and design thinking into how I frame up the research. So I'm busy grappling with that at the moment and trying to figure out how to approach the question from a design perspective, because I think that I come in from a creativity background, and it just makes sense to me to always bring in that lens of curiosity and the empathy of going into the other person's world and saying, how do we step into the world and come and co-create together what emerges. So it's that open space of what happens along the way. And my hope is to to eventually find the question. That would be lovely. I'm working on that right now, and I'm figure it out.
To find the question that guides your research.
Yeah.
Interesting. Will you update us?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be hearing about it along the way. I have a long journey.
I remember when someone asked me, "What's your research question?" I said, "Oh my goodness, I have to have one."
I know that they keep making me pick one. It's like, I've got a landscape for them, please. Just I've got a landscape. Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what Doug was talking about too, of like fitting kind of some of these principles in certain ways that we need to fit into societal structures, that we must have one question versus like if we do use these principles, we're inviting many questions, aren't we? We're complexifying it, and we're not coming in with one question. We're being open to our questions to evolve. And how do we fit that within like a structure that requires one question?
So yes, it's the expanding space of the question. That's what I'm looking for, but academia is not really keen on that. So
yeah, I wonder if like reframing it sometimes too, like, what's your curiosity? And then it opens and invites something different. Great, thank you, Marlies. Do you want to pick someone else?
Is it Banoi?
Yes, that's pronounced correctly. Thank you. I'm working in the Netherlands in the hip-hop community. So we're trying to bring the hip-hop community together, because it's now all kinds of individuals and individual organizations. And we're working with all those stakeholders, different stakeholders, to create a hip-hop community. Well, I've worked with Celiane, I use the social constructionism and design thinking for this co-creation, of course, for the systemic change. And I hope I can, join Taos Institute for getting more knowledge and working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoit. Do you want to pick someone else?
Yes, I would pick Josh.
Thank you, Benoit.
So thanks, Benoit. So for me, I've been doing this probably 25 years, building communities and working in the social construction space. And I guess this is sort of a physician heal thyself, because it's been a very lonely endeavor. I just got back from Switzerland, actually, from the first conference on tacit knowledge so after 20 some years of working with tacit knowledge, this is the first time that they're actually recognizing it and have it as a national or an international thing. So I was excited to join this community, because I want to have communities of my own. I've been busy building them for everyone else, but been missing them for myself. So that's my dream.
Thank you, Josh.
Let's see. How about Doug?
Okay. Well, I'll talk about one of the things I'm doing, and I'm this PhD project with Taos has gone on much longer than I thought, but we had things like pandemics, and I was abroad for a year when I'm not allowed to work on it by the rules of the grant I was on.
Oh, wow.
But what I've come down to on the research is really looking at different ways of teaching would-be entrepreneurs. So this is entrepreneurship education, and how we can teach them to collaborate. Because I believe, and I think it'll prove out, that collaboration is probably the main skill that they lack to have success. Because if you can't draw in other people, other resources, other opportunities, you can't succeed. So you have to be able to work in an ecosystem, in a network. And so we're actually contrasting 3 different ways of teaching entrepreneurship. One very interesting team academy out of Finland, where it's a 3-year program. They teach, the students enter into it. They form one of many cooperatives. And so they have an umbrella cooperative, and then they have the mini cooperatives below that. And they manage that business for 3 years. Or it could be a social business as well, or a social organization, but it's done in a cooperative. That's one. Celiane, of course, we've been to Breda on that, and that you teach that in a certain way there with social construction, which is similar to Chaos Pilots. And then we have what's done at Twente, which is a more traditional way of doing things. And so we're looking to see which of these actually is more successful in terms of teaching this idea of collaborative problem solving. So the premise is that collaboration is important, and then we look at how they teach collaborative problem solving, which is a skill that has been somewhat defined.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, who has not gone? Thomas, I haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've been a bit removed from the Taos Institute, or at least just kind of on the fringes, but I've been very attracted to it and been kind of following for some time. My background is I was trained as a social psychologist, and I've spent most of my career as a market researcher and a data scientist, and on the side, I also enjoy writing poetry. So I'm hoping all of those things somehow can magically be combined through working with others to help promote social justice in some shape or form. And so I love that to hear about all the things that are going on. I'm hoping to get a bit more involved. So thank you for hearing me.
And Thomas, I don't know if you can see who else is here.
Let me just see if I can adjust my screen. I'm working off my phone, which is a little different for me here. So give me a moment.
I think it might just be Noah and Alex left.
All right, let's go with Alex. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I will keep it very simple. I think what I value about the Taos community is kindness and respect and listening. And one hope that I would have for the Taos community is to see more of these conversations popping out everywhere in the world, whether it's a virtual world or in person. So more of these really rich connections. And Noah, I think you're the last one.
I don't know, Noah, if you can unmute or if you want to text in. I'll just type this in here really quick so we can see if Noah to share.
Oh, hi. I just want to say
go.
hi and thank you for the invitation. And I'm just in a learning phase, so appreciate that.
Great, thanks, Noah.
Yeah.
So, my apologies here. Got stuff going on in the house. Let me close these doors. We just went through a flood in our house, and we're in a rental and moving our stuff over here. So my apologies, we're a little bit in chaos. So let's spend a moment to just kind of reflect on, as we were listening to, we would normally go into building on kind of these values and hopes, to then look and see where there might be some opportunities to find commonalities, to look for opportunities to understand more deeply, to stay in a space of learning and curiosity, to understand what each of us has shared a little bit more deeply, and building more of a sense of connection around that through understanding the stories and the values that people are sharing. But given our time, we're just going to hop into a next. Do we want to take a moment to just reflect on that, or ask any questions that we might have of each other before we move on to the next step? Is there anything anyone would want to ask more about or reflect on what they heard?
And also, I was wondering, Kristin, since we won't have time to go through the whole phases, if it would make sense for us to stop at the framing and maybe entertain the possibility of, if we are here creating communities in action. So harvesting what all of us talked about, how would you see connections and how would you see emergence and a common ground among our diversity that could connect us, that could be a point of continuation? And just to give an illustration, in Uganda, the first days, we were sitting together with the whole community. So the 3 NGOs, with the kids, with the adults, with the elderly, and we were together just sharing where we come from, how we stand into our lives, and what those NGOs meant to us, and the visitors. And at the end of the day, we were harvesting and trying to create a map of where do we meet and how we would like to move forward. And so many ideas and new projects came up from the group. It was full of energy.
I think that's a great idea. So as we move into like harvesting what we all shared, and what we might see emerging in our commonalities connection, one thing that I really reflected upon is kind of our commonalities of, and that I'm so curious about, that I'd want to understand more about, our commonalities of working with social constructionist ideas and principles and practices in many different settings. So the corporate setting and entrepreneurship, and Benoit, what you're doing with hip hop, how cool, and in arts, and in the UN social SDGs, and in many different settings, in the educational settings. So what are we learning about how these are transforming systems and settings, about as we engage with social constructionist principles and practices? And I'm just really curious about that. Like, I'd love to continue the conversation about what we're learning across all of these different contexts that are similar, and maybe how we're needing to adapt language or the way we work. Marlise, as you talked about the tensions, like as we try to go outside of our own community of people who understand social constructionist principles and practices, engage them, how do we create spaces for folks that are really new to that kind of practice, that kind of know being, and even know how? How do we create spaces for that value the differences in that as well? Yeah, that's one thing that really came up for me. How about anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question of Josh. I've got in my head what I think tacit knowledge is, but perhaps you could just give it a little bit of an explanation, so that what is in my head might or might not be right or wrong, please.
Love it. Oh, Josh, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So tacit knowledge is essentially the knowledge that is very hard to document and very hard to put into any kind of tangible form. And it's usually knowledge that has to be socialized. So that's why communities are so important. So even thinking about, physical tasks like tying your shoes or riding a bicycle, I always use that. As a matter of fact, I just taught it yesterday to my class, and I have them transfer how to throw a ball to each other. And then I have them transfer it to me, but I tell them that I'm an alien from another planet. And they say, pick up the ball, and I'll say, what's a ball? And after that, basically, the whole thing shuts down, because they say, oh, well, I didn't capture that. I didn't capture it. Well, those are things that are built into us that we don't even know we know. They're just so complex. And so, so really the only way to get at tacit knowledge is through community, dialogue, socialization, experience, observation, not from reading a book or from putting it down on paper. Just in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of people were into trying capturing knowledge in databases and all that. And I would argue most of it's not knowledge, it's just information. Because I think most knowledge is tacit. It's not explicit. It's not out there. So that's what it is.
So would that then be in some way embodied
Yes.
knowledge? Yeah. Okay.
I call it embodied and entangled. So it's embodied in the individual, and it's entangled in the social network.
Oh, cool.
Both at the same time.
That a concept came up a lot in Uganda too, of like, we don't know what we don't know. So we have to create these conditions for us to explore that, and understanding what other people know in terms of indigenous knowledge, tacit knowledge. I love that. Does that relate to what you're talking about too? Like, we don't really know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else? Is there anything emerging in our conversation and our commonalities or connection for us to continue to connect or create together?
Well, one of the things I would just bring up, and this goes back to one of my mentors in Basel. So for Alex, you might know this area. I worked for Sibagagi for a number of years and then Novartis and Syngenta. So one of my mentors there said, when you're changing things, you have to allow people to have a roof over their head, or a Dach in German. And I think this goes back to the idea of building a house, that if you don't have some basic protections and structures in place, you can build a house eternally, but it will never serve a purpose of providing shelter and providing structure to what you want to do. So there's a need for structuring to allow these things to flourish and to happen. And if you neglect the structuring, then these are just ideas, and they kind of float off and they blow away in the next rainstorm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a little bit why I have kind of come into the cooperative movement and trying to create co-ops where we can in certain areas, because it does provide a reinforcing structure to exercise these disciplines and these activities.
Mm. Well, I really struck with that, Doug, and that saying of you need to have a shelter over people's heads when you're changing things. Because I'm terrible. Celiane will tell you about this. You probably experienced this too. I'm terrible at telling people like where we're going, like that we have this plan in place, and sometimes just start engaging it. And people where it is, this goes to what you were asking, Marlies, about like resistance to that. Sometimes that people don't know what that structure is, that it's really hard to engage in it then and feel a sense of safety and comfort and recognition. And so it's something that I'm definitely always learning about. I love that.
One theme that I heard that I thought was important, or that I think is important, is most of what we're talking about are things that are somewhat intangible and unmeasurable. And today's world, if it's not measurable, it's not real. Particularly in the academic world where I am, basically, they don't even like qualitative research. They like quantitative numbers. You've got to be measured. And you can't measure love. You can't measure hope. You can't measure caring. You can't measure tacit knowledge. You can't measure community. As soon as you do, it doesn't exist anymore, basically. You destroy it. And so, for me, working in these groups and working with, these ideas is sort of maybe an act of rebellion, to say there is another way of looking at the world that maybe we've forgotten, that I've looked at in the past, but we've kind of thrown it out because it doesn't match the simplicity that we're trying to get at. We're trying to simplify things so much that we're basically tossing out the wonderful complexity that makes reality, and accepting a false reality almost, that's too simple. And so for me, I think, that's an important thing about this group. I think about the Taos program. I think, the conference I was at, those groups that are finally, wait a minute, we need to kind of re-up and recapture some of these ideas and get people to recognize that they are important and that they are real. So anyway, that's kind of something I heard.
Beautiful.
My interpretation, at least.
Thank you, Josh.
Makes sense, yeah.
We have 2 minutes left, Celiane. How would you like to close this part of the conversation to be continued?
Yeah, so I just, I wrote down all the insights from each one of you on ChatGPT, and I asked it for a harvest in a poetic way.
I love it.
And I got something I just put in the chat, and maybe one of you could read out loud as a closing moment. Let's see what ChatGPT did for us.
That's wonderful. Benoit, would you like to read out loud?
I can do that. In a realm of co-creation where thoughts converge, a curious spirit, a PhD search, in the rhythmic beats of hip-hop's groove, a social construction, a world we move. Beyond corporate towers, a collaboration dance, we sculpt connections, give ideas a chance. Poetry whispers, a language so grand, creating worlds where visions stand. In the business symphony, a diverse score, a tapestry woven, rich and galore. Kindness, the glue that binds us tight in this community where hearts take flight. Different ways of learning and evolving art, a journey of discovery, a masterful chart. Yet in this odyssey, language holds the key, creating worlds where we are all meant to be. So let's embrace the power of words in the echoes of dialogue where understanding girds. For language is more than a tool, it's a great gateway to worlds where communities rule. Wow.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
No, I thank you for reading.
Did you just feed the transcript through that and did do that? Is that how you did it?
Sorry, say it again, Josh.
Did you just transcript from our conversation in and that's how you did that, or what?
I made some notes of what each of you said, and then I put the notes through chat, and I asked it, can you harvest in a poetic way?
Oh, nice.
And that's
That's
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What we had, what Celiane mentioned, would be a very brief kind of chat about this. And I just so appreciated the conversation that we had. I learned so much about what people are doing and curious about and exploring and practicing. I can't wait to continue the conversation. Do we have any closing reflections? Anything anyone would like to share? And then we'll start a conversation so we can continue.
Oh, well, I would just like to thank you for the invite and thank you everybody for your contribution because I'm learning from that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, for me, it's the caring about rather than the helping. Very powerful.
Thank you.
And that actually, Marlies, came out of the experience where people were like, wait a minute, I'm actually feeling like I'm getting more than I'm giving and realizing like that there's this mutuality and reciprocity in that. And the care came out of that experience that people had, that mutual caring. Plus Uganda is just such an amazing caring place that people are amazingly beautiful and wonderful that it just is easy to do. Anything else? Well, thank you all. Thank you to my partner Celiane and to Alex for organizing this and for everyone for showing up and contributing to the rich conversation. And I can't wait to continue to see you in the comments.
Please reach out to us. Let's keep the conversation rolling.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for coming.
Look forward to it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.